Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Gary. If you don't know me, it's good to have you here today. I'm a tad cheesed off with Keegan O'Reilly. He's not even here to hear me saying I'm cheesed off with him. No, I'm actually delighted. I was delighted with Ruth's choice of songs, talking about the goodness of God this morning, and I thought, that's good, because that's the track I'm on. And then Keegan pipes up with all this stuff about society and divisions, and I'm thinking, don't steal my thunder. That's where I'm going next Sunday. So Keegan actually, he said, we can talk about controversial things. And to be honest, I think next Sunday is going to be it for me. What I wanted to speak about today, folks, is something that I think is critically important. But for me, there's a huge trigger attached to it. And right at the end, I'm going to mention the trigger. And then we'll try and address that next Sunday, because I just simply can't do that today in what I'm doing. But I wanted to start off with a question for you to think about, okay? How's your love life? All right, so in saying a question like that, sometimes your brain just heads down one track, okay? It's not just where our brains would head down. It's a broader question. Things like, how's love doing in your life? How's your loving of people doing in your life? So, second question to think about. If you could come up with in your mind the idealized loving experience, what would that look like for you? So I'm going to present you a story which I want you to evaluate in your own minds, okay? So I read just this last week that down at Dumfries House, there is a special room in the house called the Pink Room. So I Googled it to have a look, and it's just a very old oak table with some chairs around and some very antique furniture. It's a favorite room of King Charles. And they now allow you to hire that for private dining, where you can go as a couple, you can sit there on your own and be served by a butler and have a 3-course meal fit for a king. I didn't Google how much you'd have to pay for that. But that is an opportunity. So if you were a lad and you had a girl you fancied and you wanted to impress her, who knows? Maybe that would be just the idealized romantic option. Okay, vote. How many of you think if a lad did that with a girl, that sounds like authentic love? How many of you think, not so sure about that one? Okay. How many of you know that a story like that could well be an ambitious lad turning on the charm to get what he wants from the girl? Right? I mean, it's one of the scenarios. So we do have to sometimes question, in all the activities that go on under the banner of love, what does genuine love look like? Especially in a society like ours. How would you recognize genuine love? And I think we are at an absolute crisis point in our country, because when you speak to young people and they talk about the dating world of today, it sounds like a horror story, to be honest. So what does it look like? Can I give you another story and you tell me if you think this one sounds like real love? In July 2025, that's this year, a 46-year-old English teacher was teaching in a school in Bangladesh. And a military jet crashed into the school, causing the school to be engulfed in an inferno. She repeatedly entered into burning classrooms to rescue students, even as her own clothes were engulfed in flames. She later died from near total burns on her body. Estimates are she rescued at least 20 students. How many of you would vote that that's genuine love? No hesitation, right? Something about the horror of that story triggers our hearts and to say absolutely, no doubt, that was love. Why? How about this story? 2023, down on a beach in Essex. A lad, I think he was in his early 30s, by the name of David Cole, and his 3-year-old son were in the sea, and they were caught in a riptide and swept out to sea. He managed to keep his son above the water, and by the time the rescue vehicles got to him, his son was alive, but he lapsed into unconsciousness and wasn't saved, and he perished. How many of you would vote and say that was love? Do you know, folks, see when you start throwing stories around like that, in any culture, in any country, no matter where you go, the vast majority of people would hands up and say that was love. Recognizable everywhere. Why? For me, it's love for two reasons. That number one, it involved the sacrifice of self for the well-being of another person. In other words, there was no self-interest there. And how many of you realize that sometimes it's the self-interest that perverts love? Is that not true? Self-interest. We do things because of something we want to get for ourselves. And yet these stories just reveal that it was sacrificial of self, totally for the well-being of other people. And that is the mark of true love. So the kind of love that we sang about today that God has for us, the kind of love that we are charged to have for one another, the kind of love that Jesus taught, is this kind of love that involves self-sacrifice on behalf of the well-being of others. I want to talk about this today. I've called my message Love Bleeds, because I think it is the essence of true love. What I wanted to do this morning, folks, for good reason, I wanted to explore at a deeper level this idea of love. And I'm going to just lay a bit of a foundation this morning as to why we should be looking at this earnestly and seriously as people. Okay? 1 Corinthians 13, verse 13, this incredible passage, which is often spoken about at weddings, and it's boasted as this huge eulogy for life of what we should be aiming at and this ambition. It says these words. Now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. We touched on it last week when I spoke about hope. And Paul ends off by saying the greatest of these is love. So to recap what I said last Sunday, there are three critical virtues that we have to have in our lives if we're to live our lives successfully, which are the absolute bottom foundation, which we can never lose. If we lose, you can lose everything else. But if you lose these threes, you're done. Faith, hope, and love. And he said the greatest of these is love. So I need to throw it at you and at me at the same time. That if you hope to live your life successfully, the thing that we have all got to master is this issue called love. that the ultimate of human maturity is to arrive at that place where we can love successfully. That is the pinnacle of all human achievement. Do you know, a passage I've often looked at, and it's been quoted many times, Peter wrote about it in his epistle. He spoke to the Christians there, and he went through a long, quite laborious list where he said to them, right, you people, you need to make an effort to grow in your faith now, okay? So this is what you need to do. You need to add to your faith this. And then he goes through a long list of saying, so add to your faith this. And so once you've added that, now add this. Then once you've added that, now add this. And it was almost like a building block. And finally he gets to the place where he says, and then add brotherly kindness. In other words, now start being nice to everyone. And then he ends off by saying, and add to that love. In other words, the pinnacle of growth in faith has to be this arriving at this place where we can love successfully. So it is extremely challenging. So where do you go with something like this? I have been extremely challenged by a story in Jesus' life that I want to show you today. And folks, when we go there, I want you to read it through again and again. And I want to see how this story provokes you when we're talking about what the concept of real love is. Okay. So the situation we're looking at is Jesus' crucifixion. And we're looking at an episode that occurred during that crucifixion. Not a lot. It's in Luke 23, 32 to 34. Just a couple of verses. Look at what it says. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. You know, I think part of the problem of reading words like that is we read them pretty academically. I don't know if any of you remember watching The Passion of the Christ and movies like that where they try and depict what that was like, the utter horror of it. So if we had to try and set the context of what has happened here, he has been stood up in front of people and hated on, berated, called names, abused, mocked, ridiculed, beaten to inches within death, had his beard pulled out, slapped in the face. And then they take him to this place in front of his mother, strip him naked, and nail him to a cross. Okay, so pause a moment there. How would you respond, and how have you typically responded when someone disrespects you? How many of you get triggered through disrespect that you want to bite their head off? Okay? So imagine you've gone through all that abuse. Here you are pinned to the cross. What do you make of what he says? What do you see in there? You know what I see? I see him there in utter agony, executed and dying, having been through the worst abuse imaginable from people who hate him. And he looks down at them, and his heart is moved with compassion. And he looks down on them and he says, oh God, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. No railing for their heads. No, I'm going to get you. No vengeance. No hatred. No hostility, no resentment, no bitterness, just compassion in your heart for the people who've killed you. I find that absolutely staggering. That is beyond belief. That someone would be so others-centered, so not self-centered, that in the midst of all their agony, they could look past all of that and have compassion for the people who are killing them. I just find that staggering. Do you know what I find in there, folks? The thing that grips me about that story is the absolute lack of self-centeredness. Completely focused on other people. I find that staggering. When would you ask for forgiveness for somebody? Think about it. Someone who's done something really bad. When would you ask for forgiveness for that person? You've all heard my story, right? Back in Zimbabwe, when our country was being destroyed by one individual, me as a Christian and me as a pastor wanted to pray, desperately wanted to pray, God, all we need is one man with a good eye and a gun and one bullet. That's all would solve our problem. Forgive the guy? Not a chance. Put a bullet in his head. That's how I wanted to pray. Compassion for the guy? Not a chance. Until I felt God whisper to my heart, if you were his mother, how would you pray? So you see, folks, you can demand justice and vengeance for people you hate. But what if you love them? Only then would you be provoked to begin to pray, don't punish them, forgive them. And here we see the love of God for humanity, wanting rather to forgive and not punish people who've done the most hideous evil. It's just such a staggering story. Listen to this verse, 1 Peter 4, verse 8. It's fascinating in this kind of discussion. It says this, above all, love each other deeply because love covers a multitude of sins. So when you love someone who is sinning and doing things wrong, and you love them, you would rather find a way of covering that over rather than praying for vengeance. You know, I'd rather cover it. That's what love does. Okay, so we need to get a handle on what kind of love this is. And this is critical for you and I in understanding this kind of love. Okay. John 3:16 to 17, absolutely famous verses. You know them off by heart, many of you, but we just need to pause, go back there and think. All right, John 3:16 to 17. Jesus spoke these words. He said, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him." So, in my context and my history, someone like the ruler we lived under, something like Hitler, these staggering verses are saying that God so loved those individuals that he gave his one and only Son, that if they choose to believe in him, they wouldn't perish, but have eternal life. It's a staggering thought. All right, so let's think it through slowly, all right? Who's been spoken of here? For God so loved the world. Who's the world? Keegan touched on it this morning about how divided even we as a church can be as far as political movements are concerned. Think about the people you despise, the people that have committed the most hideous atrocities in our country. That verse is telling us that God not just loved them, so loved them. So loved them. These dreadful people who he'd rather throw a brick at. He so loved them. So what did it provoke him to do? You see, this is where the story gets interesting, okay, which a lot of the times we miss out. Because God is a fair and just God, he knows that one day they are going to get it. They are going to have to pay for what they've done. Because he's a just God. He can't just overlook it. They have to face the penalty for their actions. But because of his love for them, he says, I will send my one and only son. I've only got one son. I will send my one and only son to pay the penalty on their behalf so that they don't have to pay it themselves. And if they choose to believe in him, they'll be forgiven and have eternal life and not have to face that judgment day. Staggering. So folks, let's think that through. This world that he's speaking of, what do they deserve? Do you think they deserve judgment or do you think they deserve mercy? It's judgment. It's judgment. That's what they deserve. So what did they get? What they deserved or what they didn't deserve? They got what they didn't deserve. So the whole notion of God's love is God choosing, because he has paid the price for sin, to treat people in a way that they do not deserve by giving them mercy. Undeserved is the absolute substance of the love of God. Undeserved kindness and mercy shown to us. So that story of Jesus hanging on the cross is him completely, with absolute integrity, staying true to what he had come to do, and that was to grant forgiveness to the undeserving. And to offer this grace to the people who've done so much bad to him that even at that point he would be willing to forgive them. It's utterly remarkable. Now, folks, shall I tell you the good news? We are that world. We are the ones being offered that level of kindness and love and mercy. And if I could stop preaching there, I'd be as happy as Larry, and so would you. But it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop with us being the recipients of that incredible love, because the Bible goes on to say this. And Jesus himself went on to say this, and this is where it gets really difficult. John 13, verse 34, he said, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another." And so what becomes apparent then for you and I, folks, is that you and I all now are living in what we call a dispensation of grace, where God is withholding judgment from the world in order to provide a way out, and that's through undeserved kindness and mercy of God. And he calls us to demonstrate that kind of unconditional love for people, that level of grace and kindness to the undeserving. He is asking you and I to love that way, to master that and grasp that in our lives and demonstrate it to other people. And that does present a problem, okay? If you will have heard Hazel's story on the day we got the phone call that her mom had been murdered. How as I told her, she fell on her knees and forgave the men that had done it. Did they deserve that? Absolutely not. But she forgave. How many of you seen Erica Kirk, the widow of Charlie Kirk, at the memorial service I had? Forgiving. Is it deserved? Absolutely not. But we are living in this dispensation of grace where God is offering undeserved forgiveness to people. And that's why we have to model that. And so, folks, in all our relational struggles, in all the conflict we have, in all the tensions, and let's face it, our country is full of relational tensions at the moment. In all of those, this is the kind of love that you and I are called to model. Okay, so we have to move on from that and then say, all right, so how? How do we get to that place where we can be so utterly selfless that we simply don't consider ourselves and always do what's best for the people in front of us? Do you know, if ever you try and do some horticulture, or vegetable gardening, or gardening of any kind really, to try and produce any kind of fruit or vegetable, you'll find that there are two critical things that you've got to do to grow anything well. Number one, you've got to feed the vegetable. And number two, you've got to pull out the weeds, right? You've got to pull out the things that restrict the growth. And I think the same is true for us in trying to establish anything good in our lives. We've got to be able to identify the weeds that are causing things not to grow. And I want to show you a passage in the Bible which I think identifies, and we've kind of touched on it already, but it identifies biblically what our big problem is in loving like the way God loves. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4 to 5, in describing love, says this. It says, love is patient. Love is kind, does not envy, does not boast, it's not proud, it's not rude. Look at this next one. It is not self-seeking. In other words, love doesn't put self first. Doesn't put self first. Puts the other person first. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. This issue of not self-seeking. Do you know, if you could pin down that major problem that every one of us has with our personality, it's our biggest problem as people. We are selfish and self-centered. We put ourselves first. It's our biggest struggle. How many of you found that? Our nature is selfish. We consider ourselves before the other person. I want to read to you a definition of what it means about being not self-seeking. Okay, listen to this definition. This means that genuine love does not prioritize its own interests, desires, or advantage at the expense of others. It is not selfish, self-centered, or driven by personal gain. Instead, it is focused on the well-being of others, even if it requires sacrifice. That is staggering. That's what it means to not be self-centered. And of course, Jesus himself said in John 15, verse 13, greater love has no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. Greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life. So in other words, there is love, but then there is the greatest love. And the greatest love is the sacrifice of yourself for the well-being of other people. So what would that look like in real life? Well, it's like the stories we heard at the start. It's the soldier running across a shooting field to rescue a wounded soldier to try and get him back to safety. Parent staying up all night with a sick child. The person forgiving when everything inside of them wants revenge. You know, those are all signs of not prioritizing yourself. So what do we have to do? Do you know, I think relationships are always the provocation for us. That this virtue of great love does not grow in our lives except in relationships. And so the provocation to get us to deal with self-centeredness is going to come in relationships. We're going to be triggered. So we've got to evaluate how we make choices and decisions in life. That are we making these decisions solely for our own advantage without considering anybody else in the decision we're making? And it applies across the board as to who's going to be affected by this choice that I make? And am I considering them in the decision I'm making? Or is it just because of what I want to do? Folks, example, classic example. Let's rewind. Let's go back to the start of the service. Let's imagine I've just stood up. Morning, folks. I've been going through a torrid time. I'm done. I'm not being your pastor anymore. Or I'm out of here. See you. Did I prioritize you? I can't do that, ever. So we can't do that to each other. We can't just make choices like that. You know, we've got to consider other people. And you know, folks, for me, see, if I could be totally honest with you, do you know my biggest struggle as a Christian has been prioritizing me? Do you know when I look back over the route God has taken me over the years, do you know that along that route, in almost everything He's asked me to do, it's come about because He's asked me to quit trying to please myself and obey Him. And just about every time I've had to do that, I've had to die to something I wanted to do. I mean, I've been honest about our whole journey coming to Scotland. It was so difficult, our first years of arrival here. I literally would have packed my bags, got in a canoe, and paddled somewhere else to escape from what God was asking me to do. I didn't want to do it. And it took everything within me to actually kill that off and say, all right, I'll do it, you know. But my pleasing myself was huge. So it's not easy. And I'm convinced that's why Jesus spelled it out so clearly in Matthew 16. He said, Matthew 16:24, Jesus said to His disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself. Quit trying to please you. Please Him, not you. And we've got to realize that things like taking offense, wanting vengeance, being bitter and angry, all those things we never saw in Jesus when He was hanging on the cross because He was so other-centered. So a lot of those things are self-centeredness in us when we're baying for someone's blood. So I just wanted to close off, folks, with my own personal thoughts on why a subject like this is so important for 3 reasons. All right. Number 1, to be truly successful in life is to be like God in our character. Because He's the most perfect person. And therefore we have to learn to love this way. And it has been given to us in this dispensation of human history that we are living in an age of undeserved kindness and mercy of God towards people. And we have to demonstrate that. So we're called to the same thing Jesus did, sacrificing ourselves for the well-being of other people. That was the love of God in action to broken humanity, and we have to exercise that and demonstrate it. There is no other way. So we've got to master that kind of love. So if we're going to be successful, it has to be that way. But more than that, do you know, we're all aware of cultural trends and tendencies and changes of culture in our country, right? You, as a person, are building the culture of your own life. And you know, the thing about culture is that culture can prevail once so culture is established by a group of people who all unite under certain values and practices, and it become embedded in society. The same thing can happen in our lives. We're building the culture of our homes and our lives, and we need to get this thing right for our homes, because that influences other people. We influence other people. I don't know if you saw, it came out yesterday, there was a bit in the news about Tim Allen. How many of you know Tim Allen, the actor? I don't know if any of you saw it. Do you know what he said? I'll read you the story. Because of Erica Kirk, listen to what happened to him. So he's about 70 odd now, I think. This is what the press said. Tim Allen lost his dad when he was 11 to a drunk driver who killed him. He posted recently on X, when Erica Kirk spoke the words on the man who killed her husband, that young man, I forgive him. That moment deeply affected me. I have struggled for over 60 years to forgive the man who killed my dad. I will say those words now as I type. I forgive the man who killed my father. Can you see how critical it is that we be that kind of light in society? That we love that way, so that we can point people in that direction. And of course, it's all because Jesus made it possible. So we have to shape that culture in our own lives. But also, folks, and this is a big one, the third reason why we really need to be good at this is because we have to live counterculture. You know, Paul, I don't know in which age he was referring to. It does sound like our age. It could be another age. But he wrote words that are staggering indictment on society, and they definitely are an indictment on our society today. He wrote these words about culture, and this is what he said. 2 Timothy 3, verse 1 to 3, he said, mark this, take note of this. There will be terrible times in the last days, and when you read these words, you think, for goodness sake, we're there. Listen to how he describes people. People will be what? Sacrificial people who live sacrificially for the well-being of other people. Absolutely, fundamentally not. Lovers of themselves. Lovers of money. Boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, and it just goes on this hideous list. How many of you notice that's society? That's the society we're living in. And you know what it's all triggered by? Loving self. Me first. And we've got to live counterculture. Got to be salt and light in our society by living the other way. So what do we learn about love? The greatest love gives. And no matter which way you look at this, the greatest love will always bleed, because it's sacrificial. Amen? It's the way we've got to live. But now comes the trigger. And I want to touch on this, and Keegan touched on it a bit. So this is presenting us a picture as Christians of living in a society where we are gracious, forgiving, kind, welcoming. Where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line when people are evil? Where do we draw the line politically? It triggers that. Because does this mean, just because of everything I've said today, does this mean we're just these pushovers? Does this mean we're just a walkover? That no matter what anyone does to us, we're just going to be kind? Do you know what I think, folks? And I want to speak about this next week. I tell you what I genuinely believe. I can tell from social media that some people are going down that route. They're choosing, we'll just be kind. We'll just be nice. And others are swinging the other way. We're not going to stand for this. Do you know what I've had to realize about my own personality is I could easily be an extremist. But what I've learned about life is the mistake we often make as people is when we get presented with two options, we tend to swing to either one or the other. And we think that that's the way forward. I've come to realize it's not one or the other, it's both. There are aspects in both that we need to embrace in order to be balanced in the middle. That's what we've got to aim at. So somehow we have to look at these controversial things about society. What do we do with evil people? How do we respond to that appropriately as Christians, even though we're called to love sacrificially? How do we deal with that? Well, you'll have to come next week. Okay. I'm hopefully going to talk about that next week.